my oldest and dearest friend, Dr. Kumar Bose. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this morning. It was a great pleasure to visit your town and to come to Mithila region. Dr. Jha was unnecessarily kind to us, to me and to Dr. Bose. I think both of us are delighted to be here. When Dr. Jha asks anybody to come, I don't think anyone can refuse. His reputation, his kindness, his honesty as an intellectual and generosity as an individual are also stellar and well known, that it would be incorrect for anybody to turn on an invitation from Dr. Jha. I have learned a great deal from his own works. I have read him intensively when I was working on caste in India, and my gratitude to him goes back many decades. The day I first read his book till now, and it will go on even further. This is a wonderful occasion for us to be here, and I do hope that we are able to uphold the great tradition that Dr. Jha has established on this particular day, the anniversary celebration every year. And he has had very distinguished speakers in the past, and I am somewhat humbled by the fact that I follow in that great tradition. And perhaps what I have to say may not quite measure up, but believe me, I've tried my best. My topic today will be on the relationship between growth and development in India, and what all of this has to do with demography, especially in relationship to small towns. Now, the three things here which are quite puzzling. For example, why do I separate growth from development? And number two, why am I concentrating on small towns? Why not just urbanization? In due course of time, I hope to make explicit why I've chosen these terms very carefully and advisedly, and hopefully, after my presentation, it will make some sense to you as well. All of us know that India is undergoing a very rapid growth process. 8%, some people say. There was a time when it almost touched double digits. A large number of people in the Indian administration, the bureaucracy and the political firmament were quite confident that we would keep at this double-digit growth rate for at least 2 decades, after which, of course, we'd be equal to some of the most developed countries in the world. Incidentally, if you find that I'm speaking too fast or I'm not clear to you, do let me know, because I'm always accused of speaking too fast. And a friend of mine told me I was the lowest paid professor in JNU because I spoke the most words per minute. So do stop me if you think I'm speaking too fast. I'm doing my best to measure my delivery. However, 10% growth rate or thereabouts at Harvard for several years, especially from 2002 onwards. We've seen a fantastic spurt in growth rate. Last year it was low, around 7%. It does not augur well for the few months of this year that are left. It seems that times are bad, but nevertheless, to keep up a 7% growth rate at a time when the world is going through severe recession seems to be quite an accomplishment. So we've done very well on one front. But on the other hand, can we say that we have removed poverty? Can we say that we have developed as a society? Can we make the claim that we are growing at a pace which is equal to the developmental promises that such growth actually encourages? If you look around you, it doesn't take you very long, of course. You open a window, you step outside, and you see poverty everywhere. You see the dark smudges of poverty on every wall, in every street, in every town of the country. It's of course debatable how many people we have below the poverty line. And as you know, discussion of the poverty line have kept alive many intellectuals and scholars for over 3 decades. It's been their bread and butter. It's a bit ironical, but poverty has been the bread and butter of intellectuals for 3 or 4 decades and more, not only in our country, but all over the world. Now it depends a great deal on what kinds of figures you believe in. Do you believe in the official government of India figures, which is around 27% below poverty line? You take the Saxena report, it's around 50%. If you believe in Tendulkar, it is 43%. And of course, if there's a big hitter like the late Arjun Sen Gupta, there's roughly 77%. But do we really care? We do know there's a lot of poverty, and we do know that poverty is at our doorstep and seeping through the cracks. If we know all of this, what is really the point in talking about whether or not we have 25% poverty, 28% poverty, 33% poverty, 41% poverty, 50% or 77% poverty? There's poverty all through the country, and our growth has not quite been able to erase those marks of poverty which haunt us all the time. One way of getting a measure on the distance we are going to travel, though we have grown economically quite rapidly, distance we have to get to travel is if we look at some other indicators like, say, health or education. You do know, I'm sure, that in India about 80% of the population pay for their health expenses on their own, that is out of pocket. 80% of health expenses is out of pocket. Each person presents on average 80% of the health bill himself or herself. This is the highest in the world. It's not a good figure to be at the top, because in most developed countries, out-of-pocket expenses are roughly around 14 to 15%, and not more than that. The rest is covered by the state. But in our country, the poor and the not so poor and the rich all put together, they spend about 80% out of pocket. The only country that spends more than us is Pakistan. But that is hardly the country we should use as a measure of comparison. If you look at it in terms of education, there are problems. There's a study done by the Indian Human Development Survey report, and that says quite graphically that children between the ages 8 to 11, or 52% of children in the age group 8 to 11 in public government schools cannot recognize a simple sentence like my mother's name is Moti Behan, or compute a simple sum like 5 minus 3 is equal to 2. So roughly 52% of those in the 8 to 11 age group are unable to go to school. Those who go to private schools fare a little better, but not much better. About 60% can recognize the sentence and can compute the sum, but there are still 40% who cannot. So there's lots yet to be done in terms of health and education. Incidentally, I may also tell you that every year 39 million people sink into poverty because of health reasons. This is a figure given out by Lancet, which is a very established and well-known medical journal in the world. 24% of Indian people who are sick do not go for medical advice and help because they do not have the money. So we have still a long way to go in terms of development, though we've done rather well in terms of growth. But let us first look at the positive side, the good story. For example, the IT sector, which was less than 1% in 1990 of our GDP, began to climb impressively 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, today is about 8% of our GDP. It's a fantastic growth, something that you cannot really overlook, nor can you sneeze at it. A huge development has taken place in this one sector alone. In fact, if you look at the foreign direct investment, almost 48% of it comes to 4 sectors: IT, telecommunication, banking, and electronics. So these are the sectors that are doing very well, indeed doing magnificently, and we talk about them all the time. They are our poster boy sectors of the economy. The Economic Survey of India 2010-11 points out, however, that the IT sector employs only 2.5 million people. Can you imagine a country of India's size? The IT sector employs only 2.5 million people. Now this figure is very saddening, because I remember reading the same thing, about the same thing, in 2004-05. At that time they said it was 3 million. So I can't imagine why we lost 0.5 million over the last 5 or 6 years. However, if you take the IT, which is the information technology sector, and add to it the information technology enabled sector, it comes to roughly 3.5 million people, and that is all. If that is the case, then where are all the unemployed or employable people going? Where is the growth happening? Who is doing the growth? in which sectors is India growing fastest and how is it happening in real terms, because we can't depend entirely on the IT sector and sectors like that because they employ far too few people. So where does it all happen? I suggest to you that, and this is not really a well-kept secret, but most people should know about it, though we don't talk about it. What I'm suggesting is that much of the growth is taking place in the senior side of our economy, the untidy side, the non-glamorous side, which is the small scales in. We also know that the organized sector employs roughly between 24 to 27 million people, that is it. And this number has remained stubborn and unmoving for over several decades. Roughly half of it, around 11 million people, work in the private sector, private organized sector, the remaining work in the public organized sector. But all put together, it is not more than 27 million, and I'm being very charitable at this point because most people say between 24 and 25 million people. So the organized sector is not growing. The unorganized sector is what's picking up the slack, and that is where much of the employment is happening. Let me give you another indication. In 1960, we produced 5 billion, not million, billion with a B, 5 billion square meters of cloth in 1960. By 2005, we are producing 26 billion square meters of cloth. There's a huge jump. But interestingly, 85% of this increase took place in the informal loom sector, not in the mill sector. The informal loom sector that did most of the work. Most of the growth and development took place here. About 27% of our exports are really in the textile and ready-made garment sector. You add to it gems and jewelry, which is about 17%, carpets. There was a time when India produced 11% of the world's trade in carpets. You live in Mithila, but well, not too far from you is Varanasi, which is around where carpets are produced in large numbers. That's called the carpet belt of India. Bhadohi, Jaunpur, Mirzapur, that region. And if you were to visit those places, you will find that people who weave carpets weave them in the most desperate and poverty-stricken conditions, and yet it is from there the carpets are sent all over the world, whether it's IKEA or H&M or Macy or any such store which has international reputation. Carpets are sourced off from these very humble, rude, dark and damp cottages, and they travel miles across to drawing rooms and nurseries and bedrooms in Europe, America and elsewhere. So these are the people who are doing all the hard work. Between 1997 and 2004, textile exports increased 100%. The sad part is 2008-2009, I see a great decrease in the export of textile sector from over 20%, as I told you earlier, to around 10.6% today. I wonder very often what will happen to all those people who've come to work and now are more or less jobless in urban and semi-urban locales. What will happen to them? Where will they go? That, I think, is a problem that we have to look into and pay attention to it as well. If we look at the small-scale industry and the way in which the informal sector is growing, another indication would be from the fact that in the census, there is a category called main workers. Main workers are all those who have a job for 6 months and more. They are called main workers. And those who have work for less than 6 months are called marginal workers. You will find here that the number of percentage of male workers has gone down. Between 1991 and 2001, we don't yet have the figures for 2011, but between 1991 and 2001, the percentage of male workers has gone down by minus 1.11%, whereas the percentage of marginal workers has gone up by over 11%. So there again you find casual workers, part-time workers, informal labor force is used much more intensively than the formal labor force. And what makes it a little more saddening is the fact that the organized sector is increasingly depending upon the unorganized sector. Professor Arjun Sen Gupta, who had headed the commission on the unorganized workforce in our country, and he came up with very startling figures which are collected on a national basis. He found, for example, that in 1999, 27.8% of the labor force employed by the organized sector was in the unorganized sector in terms of outsourcing. Today, not today, but 2005, when he finally published the report, 47.6% of labor force was pulled from the informal sector by the organized sector. So if you think your motor car is built in the organized sector, you have to think again, because so much of it is actually built in the informal, unorganized sector because of outsourcing. For example, let's take the motor car. Your headlights, your gearbox, your rubber molds are very often built and constructed in machine tool in the organized sector and then sent across to the organized sector, assembled and sold as a motor car, and it rolls out of a very fancy plant, and you think you've got a car or a product from the organized sector, but that is not always the case. Naturally, we have a problem in employing people who are vocationally trained. Obviously, because so many of them work in the informal sector. The sad part is that 57% of those with middle school and high school qualifications, remember the number, 57% of those with middle school and high school qualifications are unfortunately employed in the unskilled and semi-skilled sector of the workforce. In other words, education does not seem to do you much good. There are no jobs in the organized sector that can absorb these people. We do talk about vocational training. This morning I was reading the Hindustan, where the Chief Minister of Bihar said that he's going to start more vocational schools and institutions, which is all very well. But where are these people going to be employed? That is the main question. In India, 5% of the workforce is vocationally trained. The Planning Commission, however, puts a more charitable figure in its paper called India Vision 2020. It says that 14% of the Indian workforce has vocational qualification. So the figure ranges from 5 to 14%, and you can take your pick wherever. But even the 14% figure is not a very healthy figure, because if you compare it with Korea, 95% of the workforce in Korea is vocationally trained. So we still have a long way to go. This is also partly because of the developmental features that we seem to be ignoring. We seem to be ignoring research and development. We seem to be ignoring sciences. That is probably why we are not developing the way we should. As you probably know, India's R&D is 1/60th of Korea, 260th of USA, and 1/340th of Japan. So that is how poor we are in terms of our R&D. In terms of manpower base per scientist is 1/5 of China. Is 1/5 of China, 1/50th of Korea, 1/100th of America, 1/5 of China, and that hurts a lot. Why should that be the case? But the poor in our country are trying very hard to develop, in spite of all these hardships, in spite of all these obstacles. They're trying very hard to develop. I've spent some time in villages for the last 25 years doing a number of projects, and so has my friend Dr. Bose, and he'll tell you more about it. But in my studies, I've come across very often, poor families, very poor families, sending their children to private schools. Very poor families. I know of two families who are only two. You might say, what is two? But I know of two families who are actually below poverty line, who send their children in a private school in the district Jaunpur. And I often wonder, why should any parent have to make such tremendous sacrifice to send their children to education? And what is a private school? You know private schools in villages, they're small one-room affairs. They charge 50, 60, 120, 240. The highest I've seen is 280 in the Punjab. But that's a private school. And yet poor villagers send their children to private school because they hope that their children will become educated better than what they would have been in a government school. And yet, as I told you, only 40%, as many as 40% of children in private schools cannot recognize my mother's name is Moti Bain or 5 minutes 3 is 2. So it is a big issue. But can you believe this? In the education survey of 1980, only 2% of Indian children went to private schools. Only 2%. In the 2009-10 Human Development Survey, we find that 21% of Indian children in rural India go to private schools. 52% in urban India go to private schools. So you can imagine there's been a huge spurt in private school education, and yet we're not really employing the workforce profitably enough. And yet the quality of education is not really the one that we would really look forward to. As you know, between class 1 and class 5, there's a dropout in class 5 of 15%, class 5 to class 10 50%, and class 10 and later just 13%. So the dropout rate is very, very high. But whoever somehow manages to pass through does not get the kind of job or encouragement in the workforce as this person should by all accounts. As I told you earlier, 57% of them find work in the semi-skilled or unskilled sector of the economy. In the health situation again, there's a tremendous problem. You know, when you collect statistics on health, most often we are well. We are well people. Our families are okay. But very often, we are not well. And when we are not well, that's the only thing that matters. When a member of a family is not well, nothing else matters but the health of that family member. Nothing else matters. You can sell anything, you can mortgage anything so that your family member gets the treatment you think that person should get. I have seen in a cancer hospital a doctor telling a poor patient that your grandson has got a certain kind of cancer. I recommend you take these medicines. This poor grandfather said, "Can you hear me?" Yeah, you can. So his poor grandfather looked at the medicines and said, "I am a grandfather. Don't look at me as a poor person. I am a grandfather. You prescribe what you think will help my grandchild and I will get it, regardless of where I get the money from." When I tell you this story, my hair stands on end. This man said, "I don't care how much it costs. Don't give me these medicines because you see I'm poor. You give me what it takes to cure my grandson and I'll make sure that that medicine comes." And then again, like in the school system, 71% of those who are sick go to a private doctor. Only 17% go to a government doctor. And yet we know that government facilities and government services, including doctors, training and so forth, are so much better than in the private sector. And yet they go to the private sector because they feel that at least the doctor will look at them. As in private schools, at least the teacher will come to class. There's with this hope that they go to the private sector. And I think it's a dreadful thing. And I don't believe our citizens should be put under so much pressure. And I think our growth story should do more than just growth. It should also answer questions like development. So where is this workforce coming from? Where are these 93% of the informal labor coming from? Where are these people who are helping our textile sector grow, our ready-made garment sector grow, gems and jewelry 15% grow? Where cashew nut shelling, where are they coming from? They're actually coming from the villages which are being hollowed out. We were talking to Dr. Jha yesterday and it confirms what I always believed in. The village is no longer what it used to be. 45.5% of the rural net domestic product of India. 45.5% of what the rural economy produces, shall we say. 45.5%, roughly 50% of what rural India produces is non-agricultural. The National Sample Survey also points out that in a place like Bihar, which is supposed to be very, very backward, 33% of rural households are non-agricultural. We also know from the agricultural census that roughly 85% of all land holdings in India are below 5 acres. If you go by my sense, I think that is too generous. It is really below 4 acres or even below 3 acres. But nevertheless, if you have farm holdings of 5 acres, you cannot really sustain yourself and your family on that. Therefore, you have to send your children out. If you have 3 sons and 5 acres of land, you already have 2.5 sons too many. And they have to find work elsewhere. When I began work in villages in '84, I remember going to West UP, and many of the landowners in West UP used to make fun of me. They used to say things like, look at you, you're so thin and skinny and bow-legged and weak-chested and small-fingered. Look at us, we're big, tall, strong, good-looking people. We feed India, you're no good. 10 years later, those same families were telling me, can you employ my son somewhere? In 10 years, they had lost all their starch, all their pride, and they wanted to see the children out of the village. In Bhadoi district, there's a train there from Bhadoi to Bombay straight, direct, and goes by. If you're working in Vapi or Surat, you use that train, get off and change again. You will rarely find in some of these villages able-bodied men in the age group 18 to 45, 50. Where have they gone? They've taken the train and gone outside. Do you know in India, every year, 5 billion railway tickets are sold. 5 billion, B again. Five times the population of our country, 5 billion railway tickets are sold. And you also know that so many of us actually travel ticketless. So you can imagine how many people are traveling by train. And they're going long distances to find work. At any rate, in this three villages, I found something very unique. I found many men work in the working age group there. So I said, what are you doing here? And they said, we are farmers. I said, you cannot be farmers because farming is not what it was once upon a time. So then they told me they are also carpet weavers. So I asked them, who taught you to weave carpets? My father taught me. How old were you? 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that. How long did it take you? About a year. Why did your father teach you? Because you can't trust agriculture, so it's good to have some other occupation as well. And then I asked a simple question which turned out to be a most revealing question. I had no idea it could be one. I asked them, so have you taught your children to weave carpets? You must believe me, 100% of them said no. We don't want our children to weave carpets. Look where carpet weaving has brought us. We want our children to leave this place. And what are their sons doing? Nothing extraordinary. They're walking around in the villages with their hands in the pockets, whistling away, kicking stones, but they will not weave carpets. That is final. And how do they go outside? How do they catch a train and go wherever? Not in the Bombay movie style, you go to the railway station, buy a ticket, but there's always a network somewhere that calls you, tells you of a job prospect, and that's how you travel long distances looking for a job, looking for a contractor and hoping that you'll get at least salary by the month, if not by the year. So when you look at all of this, another important feature comes out with which I will end, and that is if you look at the demographic figures of our country, you will find that small towns are developing much more rapidly than big cities and mega cities. You know, till about 1991, the mega cities were taking over. They were the ones that were growing very rapidly. But after that, it began to taper down. You will find, for example, that between 1991 and 2001, the growth rate of urban India was roughly 2.7%. The decade before that, it was 3.04%. The decade before that, it was 3.17%. But in 2001 to 2011, it has fallen to 1.6%. It's a huge drop. The biggest casualty have been cities like Bombay and Delhi and Calcutta and Chennai. Bombay is still growing, sort of, from 30% to 12%. Delhi is growing from 52% to 26%. But Chennai and Kolkata are hardly growing. But what is growing? What is growing are the small towns. The small towns are growing very rapidly. For example, Ghaziabad has grown by 104%. Noida around Delhi by 110%, Pune by 46%. So the smaller towns are growing much more rapidly than the large towns. Nevertheless, you find a huge growth in numbers of 1 million plus cities. From 35 in 2001 census, today it is 53. So you can imagine how much it has grown, million plus cities. If you look at class 1 cities, the growth is of 2088. The million plus cities. And it's likewise in other smaller towns, A, B and C, you'll find growth rates are very high, though in mega cities the growth rate is coming down, yet because the numbers to begin with have been so high, we feel that mega cities are growing the fastest, but that is not really true. Mega cities are growing much slower than the smaller cities. In fact, if you look at the growth in urban and rural India, something very revealing comes up. Very revealing. Rural India, where 71% of our population lives even today. In rural India, the population growth was 90.8 million. In urban India, the population growth was over 91 million in the last census. So, to put it in percentage terms, in rural India, the population growth was 13%, but urban India, the population growth was 31%. That is because it is in these small towns that many of these manufactories have been set up, household industries have been set up. So when people leave village, they don't necessarily always go to Bombay or to Delhi, but they may go to Panipat, to Karur, to Tirupur and places like that to find jobs. And that is indeed where jobs are available, because it is a small scale informal sector that is absorbing most of the labor force that is being expelled from the villages because agriculture is no longer a viable occupation. I see a lot of that as we drove by yesterday to Darbhanga. I was also asking Dr. Jha what is happening in terms of Mithila's region, small scale industries and absorption of labor. It seems that you're going through a very bad time, which is why your Chief Minister has promised a lot of advance for Mithila, and I do hope it happens in the very near future, at least before the next time I come to visit you. Thank you very much.